All right, ready to dive deep into irrationality. You guys sent in excerpts from Dan Ariely's The Upside of Irrationality.
Yeah.
And we're going to uncover how our not-so-logical side can actually work in our favor. We've got a ton of interesting stuff on procrastination, motivation, what makes work meaningful, even the urge for revenge.
Yeah, it's true. We often think of irrationality as, a negative thing.
Right.
But Ariely challenges that in this book. He really dives into those unexpected benefits. And what's so interesting to me is how these tendencies can actually influence our decisions, our work satisfaction, and even how we handle those tricky situations.
Before we get too deep, could you just remind me what was Ariely's overall point in exploring the upside of irrationality?
Well, he had already, in his previous book, explored the predictable ways that we're irrational. And in this book, he wanted to move beyond just identifying those patterns. He wanted to look and see if there were situations where these, seemingly illogical behaviors might actually lead to positive outcomes.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so let's start with something we can probably all relate to. Procrastination.
Oh, yeah.
I know I'm guilty of it.
Uh-huh.
Ariely talks about his own struggle with this during his medical treatment, right?
He does, yeah. He had to undergo these interferon injections, which he describes as incredibly painful. But rather than kind of, letting procrastination get the better of him, he came up with this pretty ingenious strategy.
Oh, I'm all ears. Tell me he found a way to make those injections less awful.
He did. He decided to pair the injections with something that he really genuinely enjoyed, movie nights. So he would pick up a stack of movies that he wanted to watch, give himself the injection, and then immediately settle in for like a movie marathon. So by associating this really unpleasant treatment with something pleasurable, he actually made the whole experience way more bearable.
That's so smart. That's such clever use of behavioral conditioning.
Yeah.
It's like he trained himself to look forward to the injections.
Yeah.
Even though they were,
It's so painful. What are your thoughts on how someone could apply this kind of reward pairing to their own life?
Well, you think about a task that you're always putting off, right? Maybe it's filing your taxes or cleaning out your garage. Is there any way you could pair that with something enjoyable to make it less daunting? Like maybe listen to your favorite podcast while you do your expense report, or promise yourself you can have, a delicious treat after you organize that closet.
I love that. It's all about finding ways to motivate yourself and make those dreaded tasks a little less
Right.
scary. Speaking of motivation, Ariely also digs into some research on how financial incentives can backfire. What surprised you most about these findings?
I think for me, the most striking thing was the Yerkes-Dodson experiment. It was this experiment with rats and electric shocks.
Okay.
And they found that there was this inverse U relationship between motivation and performance. So that means that too much pressure actually hinders performance.
And Ariely took that and replicated those findings with humans and with financial bonuses.
So there's a sweet spot for motivation.
Yeah.
Too little and you don't care.
Yeah.
But too much pressure and you choke.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is that this concept, it kind of applies across species, right?
Yeah.
So in his study in India, he had people play games with varying levels of bonuses. And, their performance actually declined when the stakes got too high. So it's like our brains just can't handle that level of pressure.
Makes you wonder about those crazy high bonuses we always hear about, especially in finance.
Absolutely. And actually, Ariely tells this anecdote about presenting these findings to a group of bankers. And they were totally on board with the research until he suggested that their own bonuses might be influencing their performance. And they weren't thrilled about that idea.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I love that. That's so funny. It reminds me of Congressman Barney Frank's famous question during the financial crisis. Do we really have to bribe you to do your jobs?
Yeah, yeah.
It makes you think about what really motivates us.
It really does.
To do our best work.
Yeah.
Which leads us to another concept that Ariely explores, contra-freeloading.
Yeah.
This is that thing where both animals and humans sometimes prefer to work for their food.
Yeah.
Even when free food is available.
It's so interesting.
Why do you think that is?
Ariely actually tells a story about his own experience with this in the Israeli Civil Guard. He volunteered for guard duty, even though it meant missing exams, because it gave him this sense of purpose and a break from routine. It's almost like the act of working itself can be, inherently rewarding.
He also talks about that experiment with rats. Right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The ones who had to work for their food ended up eating more than the ones who just got it for free.
They did. It suggests that there's something fulfilling about the process of like earning something.
Right.
It's not just the end goal. It's about the journey to get there.
Totally. And to explore this even further, he brings up the stories of David and Devra. Could you just remind me about them again?
Of course. Yeah. So David was a banker who poured his heart and soul into this presentation, only to find out that the deal fell through, making his work completely useless. And then Devra, she was a book editor, who meticulously edited this like huge history book, and it ended up being totally scrapped by the publishing house.
Oh, no.
So both of them ended up feeling super demotivated, even though they were paid for their work.
Yeah, their experiences highlight the importance of finding meaning in your work beyond a paycheck.
Yeah.
Didn't Ariely do like an experiment to look into this more?
He did, yeah. He called it the Bionicles experiment.
Okay.
And in it, he had participants build Lego creations. And then he either, acknowledged their work and kept it on display, or he immediately disassembled the creations right in front of them.
Oh, that's got to be disheartening.
I know.
What do you learn from that?
So the results were really fascinating. The participants whose work was like acknowledged and appreciated, they actually worked longer and enjoyed the task more, even when he decreased their pay.
Wow.
Yeah, it really shows how powerful meaning and recognition are in shaping our motivation and our satisfaction.
So it's not just about the reward itself, it's also about like a sense of accomplishment and knowing that your work has value. Now, before we move on, I want you to take a moment to think about your work. Like, what elements of your work provide you with meaning? Is it the impact that you're making?
Yeah.
Or the skills that you're developing? Or maybe even like the recognition that you receive? Yeah. Understanding what motivates you can lead to a much more fulfilling work experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is amazing how much meaning can like drive our satisfaction at work. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about something else that I think a lot of people will find really relatable. So Ariely talks about this thing called the IKEA effect. It's that, tendency we have to overvalue things that we create ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Even if they're not, objectively perfect.
I know exactly what you mean. I've definitely felt that like sense of pride after putting together like a really difficult IKEA furniture piece.
Total.
But tell me more about this IKEA effect. What is it, really?
So Ariely illustrates this through this pretty funny study where participants had to build origami. And it turns out they weren't very good at it.
Oh, no.
But they consistently bid higher on their own, like, clumsy creations than on objectively better ones made by experts.
That's so funny. It's like we have this like emotional attachment to the things that we create.
Yeah.
Regardless of how they actually turned out.
Right. All that effort and struggle makes them feel more valuable to us.
For sure. And this bias, it's not just limited to physical objects, right?
No, not at all. It extends to our ideas as well.
Oh, interesting.
Which is what Ariely refers to as the not invented here bias.
Okay.
Or the NIH bias. Basically, we tend to favor our own concepts even when we're presented with better alternatives.
So like we think our ideas are the best.
Pretty much, yeah.
Even if they're not. What kind of research did Ariely do to explore this?
He did this really clever experiment where he had participants come up with solutions to problems like ways to save water.
Okay.
But here's the thing. The researchers actually tricked the participants into thinking they came up with the solutions when in reality, they were just repeating the researchers' ideas.
Oh, wow. So they were taking credit for someone else's ideas.
Exactly. And the craziest part is they were totally convinced that their own solutions were the best. They were more likely to support those ideas, even though they were identical to others.
That's a perfect example of how this bias can just like totally blind us. Yeah. Do you think there are any historical examples of like the NIH bias in action?
Absolutely. Ariely talks about Thomas Edison and his resistance to AC power. Edison was so invested in his own invention, direct current, that he totally failed to see the advantages of AC power. And that ultimately cost him a lot.
Yikes. That's a good reminder to be open-minded, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of being too attached to our own ideas.
For sure. So how do we avoid falling into this trap? Like, what are some things to keep in mind?
I think the key is to be open to new ideas, even if they didn't come from us. We have to be willing to challenge our assumptions and like really consider different perspectives, even if they go against what we think, because sometimes the best solutions come from those unexpected places.
I love that. Okay. I have to ask about a topic that I think secretly fascinates all of us, revenge.
Oh, yeah.
Ariely dives into this like primal urge and explores the reasons behind it. What are your thoughts on his like approach to this?
I think it's interesting because he approaches it from this really scientific perspective. He's looking at the biological roots of revenge. And he even points to research on chimpanzees.
Okay.
They're our closest primate relatives. And they also display this sense of fairness and will actually punish those who like violate that fairness, even if it means like incurring some personal cost.
He mentioned an experiment, right, where chimps had the option to pull a rope that would collapse a table of food.
Yeah.
Basically making it inaccessible to another chimp who'd like been unfair to them.
Right.
And they overwhelmingly chose to pull the rope. They were denying themselves food just to punish the other chimp.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
It really shows how deeply ingrained that desire for like retribution is. Like it goes across species.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But Ariely doesn't stop there. He goes on to share his own experience with customer service revenge.
Yeah. The story about his Audi.
That's right. He had that card that kept breaking down, and he got like the worst customer service ever.
It was terrible. They were dismissive, unhelpful.
Totally.
They basically gave him the runaround. It's amazing how bad customer service can be.
Ugh, the worst. And being the behavioral economist that he is, he turned this whole experience into like an opportunity for research.
Yeah.
But first, he had to get his revenge.
How'd he do it? So he wrote this fictional case study for the Harvard Business Review, and it exposed the company's, terrible customer service practices. He even included all these little details that only someone who had gone through that exact experience would know.
So they knew it was him.
Exactly. Subtle, but impactful.
Totally. A little bit of reputational damage.
Yeah. And, his research on revenge was really interesting. He did this experiment where participants were either annoyed by a rude actor or they were treated politely, right?
Okay.
And then they had the opportunity to punish this person by rejecting like an unfair offer, even though it meant losing money themselves.
I bet the annoyed people were way more likely to take revenge.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They were far more likely to, act out of spite, even if it meant losing out themselves. It seems like that feeling of being wronged really messes with our judgment and like makes us do irrational things.
But on a more positive note, Ariely also discusses the power of a sincere apology.
Right. Studies show that a simple "I'm sorry" can actually go a long way in lowering the desire for revenge.
Right.
And it can even restore that sense of fairness.
So kill them with kindness,
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes all it takes is just acknowledging that you did something wrong and that you're sorry to really like de-escalate a tense situation.
I think it highlights how influential social cues can be, shape our behavior and our emotions. So maybe the takeaway here is to remember that like a well-timed apology can be really powerful in building trust and restoring harmony. But let's switch gears again and talk about another interesting aspect of irrationality. That's the identifiable victim effect.
Okay.
This concept explores why we're often more moved by a single, tragic story than by statistics about like thousands of people suffering.
It's true. A story about one person's struggles can often feel like a lot more powerful than, cold, hard data about a larger tragedy. Why do you think that is?
Ariely uses that really captivating story of baby Jessica.
Oh, yeah.
Who was the toddler who fell down a well back in 1987.
Yeah.
Her story, took over the entire nation and led to this massive outpouring of support and donations.
Wow.
It seems like our brains are just wired to connect with and, empathize more easily with a single identifiable victim, someone whose story we can really understand.
Yeah, it's like we can picture that one person.
Right.
And, really feel their struggle.
Right. And this effect has actually been used by organizations like the American Cancer Society.
Oh, interesting.
In their fundraising campaigns.
How so?
So instead of just presenting statistics about cancer rates, they often share stories of individual cancer survivors.
Okay.
And by putting a face to the disease, they make it feel way more real and relatable, and that makes people donate more generously.
Oh, that's smart. They're really using that identifiable victim effect to connect with people. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But are there any downsides to this, to being so, driven by our emotions?
That's a good point. Ariely actually warns against what he calls emotional cascades.
Okay.
This is where like a passing emotion can actually lead us to make lasting decisions that we might regret later on.
Oh, that makes sense.
And to illustrate this, he tells a story about a scheduling conflict he had with a senior professor.
Yeah.
It ended up triggering this like totally disproportionate anger-fueled reaction in him.
I think we've all been there, right? Like
So,
letting our emotions get the better of us.
yeah.
Maybe overreacting to something.
Yeah, it happens. And it can really mess with our judgment and like lead to consequences we didn't see coming.
Definitely. And Ariely's point is that we often stick with those emotionally driven decisions.
Yeah.
Even after we've, calmed down. So what can we do? Like, how do we avoid falling into that trap?
He does offer some advice on how to deal with those moments when we're like super emotional. First, he says we need to like recognize when we're in that heightened emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
And if possible, we should put off any big decisions until we've had a chance to like cool down a bit.
It's like, sleep on it.
Right.
Give yourself some space
Right.
to like process everything.
Exactly. He also says it's super important to consider like the long-term consequences of our choices.
Right.
So, ask yourself, will I still feel this way tomorrow?
Yeah.
Next week? Next year? If not, maybe wait before you do anything drastic.
I love that. Sometimes we need that reminder to like think beyond the immediate moment.
Yeah.
And really see the big picture.
Right.
Okay, we've covered so much in this deep dive.
No, right.
Procrastination, motivation, meaning of labor, revenge.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And I think like the big takeaway here is that irrationality isn't always a bad thing.
Yeah.
It can actually make us more creative, more resilient.
Totally.
And it can even push us to like fight for what's right.
Absolutely. I agree. It's about understanding our own like biases and using that knowledge to make bigger choices in all parts of our lives.
By understanding the upside of irrationality, we can really use it to our advantage. Yeah. We can find more meaning in our work, make better choices, and have stronger relationships. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final question. Now that you know about these tendencies, how will you use them to improve your own life?
Yeah.
It's something to think about.
It is. Remember, we all have that capacity for both rational and irrational thought.
For sure.
The trick is finding that balance.
Right.
And using both to navigate life.
This has been such a great look into this crazy world of irrationality. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the unexpected.
Yeah, he suggests we should try to recognize when we're in that heightened emotional state.
Yeah.
And if we can, put off any big decisions until we've calmed down.
It's like that whole sleep on it idea.
Exactly.
Give yourself time to process.
Right.
Before you make a choice.
And he also says it's really important to consider those long-term consequences.
Yeah.
Like ask yourself, will I still feel this way tomorrow, next week,
totally,
next year?
Yeah, exactly.
If not, maybe just wait a bit.
I love that. Sometimes, you just need that reminder to think ahead.
Yeah.
And not just about what you want right now.
Yeah.
Okay, we've covered so much in this deep dive.
I know.
Procrastination, motivation,
It's been a lot.
The meaning of labor, revenge.
Quite the journey.
It really has. And I think the big takeaway here is that irrationality isn't always a bad thing.
No, not at all.
It can actually make us, more creative and resilient and even help us stand up for what's right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I totally agree. It's all about understanding our biases and using that knowledge to make better decisions.
I love that.
Yeah.
By understanding the upside of irrationality, we can really use it to our advantage,
Yeah.
Find more meaning in our work.
For sure.
Make better choices.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Better relationships. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
Now that you know about these tendencies, how are you going to use them to improve your own life?
That's a great question.
It's something to think about. We all have this capacity for both rational and irrational thought.
We do. The key is finding that balance,
Well,
and using both to help us navigate life.
Well, this has been an amazing exploration into this world of irrationality. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the unexpected.